The room fell silent the instant the glass tipped. Deep red wine streamed over the front of the man's navy suit, staining his white shirt as nearly 200 guests watched from crystal-lit tables inside the Grand Ashcroft Hotel in downtown Chicago. No one moved. Not because they felt sorry for him. Because everyone was waiting to see how he would react. He simply looked down at the stain, picked up his folded napkin, and quietly wiped his hands before setting it back beside his dinner plate. If you believe in kindness and second chances, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness of Heart. Outside, rain had fallen all afternoon, leaving the streets shiny beneath the evening lights. Inside the ballroom, however, everything looked perfect. White orchids lined the stage. A string quartet played softly near the windows. Executives from dozens of companies filled the room, celebrating the final negotiation of one of the largest renewable energy contracts in the Midwest. The agreement was worth just over $1 billion. Everyone believed the contract would officially be signed before dessert. Most people thought the evening belonged to Halcyon Infrastructure, one of the country's fastest-growing construction firms. Their CEO, Preston Vail, had spent months promoting the event as a celebration of American innovation. Very few people had heard the name Rowan Mercer. And that was exactly how Rowan preferred it. At 39, Rowan avoided interviews, conferences, and magazine covers. He had inherited Mercer Industrial Holdings after his father retired, but had quietly transformed it into one of the largest private suppliers of structural materials in North America. His company rarely advertised. Instead, they simply delivered. Without Mercer Industrial, almost every major infrastructure project in the region would slow to a stop. Yet, most people outside manufacturing had no idea who owned it. Rowan liked it that way. That evening, he wasn't wearing an expensive designer suit or arriving with security. He drove himself from Milwaukee in a gray SUV after spending the morning visiting one of his oldest steel fabrication plants. He still stopped by factories every month. He still knew dozens of workers by name. His assistant often joked that he spent more time in steel-toe boots than Italian leather shoes. Before leaving the plant that afternoon, Rowan had promised one employee something. "I'll make sure this deal protects every job in this building." It wasn't a speech, just a promise. Across the ballroom, Miranda Holt adjusted her champagne glass while watching guests arrive. She wasn't a bad person. She was simply exhausted. At 42, Miranda had spent 20 years climbing through Halcyon's corporate ranks. Every promotion had demanded another sacrifice. Missed birthdays, cancelled vacations, a marriage that quietly ended without either person shouting. Tonight's event mattered more than anything she'd worked toward. If the billion-dollar agreement closed successfully, Preston had privately hinted she would become executive vice president. She desperately wanted that title. She also desperately needed it. Her younger brother's medical treatments had drained nearly everything she had saved. Failure wasn't an option. So, when she noticed an unfamiliar man sitting at the reserved executive table wearing a rain-spotted jacket he'd forgotten to change before dinner, irritation replaced patience. She walked over. "I'm sorry," she said politely at first. "This section is reserved." Rowan smiled. "I know." She frowned. "I don't think you do." He reached into his pocket. "My invitation." She barely glanced at it. The printing looked different from the others. Probably fake. There must be some mistake. "It's possible. I'll have someone help you find another table. I'd rather stay here." She sighed. People nearby began watching. The last thing she needed was a scene. Just then Preston approached. "What seems to be the problem?" Miranda answered before Rowan could. "This gentleman somehow ended up in the executive section." Preston barely looked at the invitation either. Instead, he looked at Rowan's damp jacket. His worn leather overnight bag beside the chair. the inexpensive watch on his wrist. Then he smiled, not kindly. We've had gate crashers before. Several nearby executives laughed. Rowan remained calm. I was invited. I'm sure you believe that. One guest muttered loud enough for others to hear. Maybe he thought this was a free buffet. More laughter. Rowan could have corrected them. He chose not to. The evening continued awkwardly. Rather than asking security to remove him immediately, Preston decided to make an example of him. Let him stay until verification comes. It sounded generous. It wasn't. Every few minutes someone made another sarcastic comment. A waiter accidentally skipped Rowan's plate after assuming he wasn't part of the guest list. Nobody noticed except an older woman seated across the table. Her name was Eleanor Finch. She served on the board of a regional engineering nonprofit. Quietly, she slid her untouched bread basket toward Rowan. I don't think they meant to forget you. He smiled. Thank you. She shrugged. It happens. It was the smallest act of kindness in the room. But Rowan remembered it. Meanwhile, Preston stepped onto the stage. He spoke confidently about leadership, integrity, respect, partnership. Words echoed through the ballroom while Rowan listened without expression. Eleanor noticed something curious. Whenever Preston exaggerated his accomplishments, Rowan quietly wrote notes inside a small black notebook. Not angry notes. Business notes. Specific names. Specific promises. Specific claims. Almost as if he were reviewing a proposal. Dinner finally arrived. Wine glasses were refilled. Photographers moved between tables preparing for the ceremonial signing. Miranda relaxed. Everything appeared back on schedule. Then Preston announced one final toast. To partnerships built on trust. The applause hadn't even finished when one of Preston's longtime investors walked past Rowan's chair. He stumbled. Or at least that's what he later claimed. His elbow struck the wine glass. Dark red liquid splashed directly across Rowan's chest. Gasps filled the room. The investor laughed first. Then Preston. Someone nearby clapped sarcastically. Miranda didn't laugh. She simply looked away. She knew humiliation when she saw it. Rowan slowly stood. Wine dripped onto the polished floor. One photographer instinctively raised his camera. Another lowered his. Even they weren't sure whether the moment should become tomorrow's headline. Rowan calmly removed the stained dinner napkin from his lap. He placed it beside the plate. Then he looked at Preston. I think we're finished. Preston smirked. I agree. Rowan nodded once. Good. He picked up his overnight bag. No shouting. No threats. No dramatic speech. He simply walked toward the ballroom. Exit. Behind him, conversations immediately restarted. People assumed the awkward interruption had ended. None of them noticed that Eleanor Finch quietly watched Rowan leave with a troubled expression. She had a feeling the evening wasn't over. And neither was the deal. Rowan reached the hotel lobby just as the rain outside began to ease. The doorman hurried toward him with an umbrella, but Rowan waved politely. I'm fine. He stood beneath the covered entrance for a moment, looking across the wet streets. His phone buzzed almost immediately. It was his executive assistant, Tessa. Everything ready? She asked. Rowan looked back through the ballroom windows. Yes. Should I bring everyone in? Give me 5 minutes. Are you sure? I'm sure. He ended the call. Inside the ballroom, nobody knew that Mercer Industrial Holdings wasn't simply another supplier on the contract. It was the company financing nearly 40% of the manufacturing, guaranteeing delivery schedules, and providing the performance bond that every bank involved had demanded before releasing funding. Without Mercer Industrial, there would be no billion-dollar project. Back inside, Preston adjusted his tie and smiled for photographers. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "our final signing representative should be arriving shortly." An assistant leaned toward him. "Sir, we're still waiting for Mercer Industrial." Preston frowned. "They're late." "It appears so." They confirmed. "Yes." Preston glanced at his watch. "We'll wait." 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Guests began checking their phones. The musicians quietly stopped playing. The catering staff delayed dessert for a second time. Miranda walked over carrying a folder. "We've called every number." No answer. Only voicemail. Preston forced another smile. "They're probably stuck in traffic." Outside, the rain had already stopped. Meanwhile, Rowan sat quietly inside his SUV across the street. He wasn't angry. Mostly disappointed. His father had spent 45 years building Mercer Industrial on one simple belief. Character was always more valuable than confidence. That lesson had shaped every business decision Rowan ever made. He wasn't about to ignore it now. Tessa climbed into the passenger seat carrying a leather briefcase. "So?" Rowan looked toward the ballroom. "They've shown us exactly how they treat people they think have no value." She nodded. "I assumed as much after your text." Rowan opened the folder. Inside sat 2 contracts. One with Halcyon Infrastructure. Another with a smaller competitor named Northbridge Civil Partners. Northbridge had finished second during negotiations. They weren't flashy. Their executives still visited construction sites. Their owner still answered customer emails himself. Rowan had met him twice. Both meetings had ended with the same sentence. "If we ever work together, we'll build something we're proud of." Rowan appreciated people who spoke that way. He signed the second contract. Tessa smiled slightly. "I'll notify legal. And call Northbridge. They're going to think this is a joke. Tell them it isn't." Back inside the ballroom, anxiety slowly replaced celebration. The chairman of First National Development Bank approached Preston. "We're now 25 minutes behind schedule. We'll begin shortly. The funding committee is asking questions. They'll have answers." Miranda watched Preston's confidence begin to crack for the first time all evening. Another assistant hurried across the room holding a tablet. "Sir." "What now?" "I found something." "What?" "The guest we asked to leave." "We didn't ask him to leave." Miranda looked away. They all knew they had. The assistant swallowed. His invitation wasn't fake. Preston rolled his eyes. "So, whose was it?" The assistant turned the screen around. At the top appeared Mercer Industrial Holdings. Below it, Rowan Mercer, owner and chief executive officer. Silence. Complete silence. Miranda felt her stomach tighten. "No." The assistant nodded. "Yes." Someone whispered. "That's him." Another executive stared toward the ballroom doors. "The man with the wine." Nobody finished the sentence. They didn't need to. Preston grabbed his phone. "Call him." "We already have." No answer. He declined. Again. He declined again. Miranda quietly closed her eyes. For 20 years, she had studied negotiations. One lesson echoed in her mind. People rarely remembered the numbers. They always remembered how you made them feel. Nearly 40 minutes later, the ballroom doors opened again. Conversation stopped. Rowan walked back inside. His jacket had been changed. The wine stains were gone. He carried no expression of victory. Only professionalism. Behind him entered 6 members of Mercer Industrial's executive team. Several guests immediately stood. Not because anyone instructed them. Because now they understood who had just walked into the room. Preston hurried forward. "Mr. Mercer." Rowan shook his head gently. "Rowan is fine. I owe you an apology." "You do." "It was a misunderstanding." "It wasn't." Preston hesitated. Rowan continued calmly. "You understood exactly what you believed I was." No one argued. Because no one could. Miranda stepped forward next. "I'm sorry." Unlike Preston, she didn't try to defend herself. "I judged you before speaking with you." Rowan looked at her for several quiet seconds. "I appreciate your honesty." She nodded once. "I don't expect forgiveness. That's not really the issue." "What is?" "The issue is culture." He looked around the ballroom. A billion-dollar partnership isn't built on presentations. He glanced toward the stage. It's built on how people are treated when nobody thinks they matter. No microphones amplified his voice. Yet every person in the room heard every word. Eleanor Finch quietly smiled. She had suspected something unusual about Rowan from the beginning. Not because he looked wealthy. Because truly confident people rarely needed everyone else to know it. The chairman of the bank approached carefully. "Mr. Mercer, are we proceeding with the signing?" Rowan reached into his briefcase. Everyone assumed he was removing the contract. Instead, he removed a different folder. Blue instead of black. "Our company has made a different decision." Several executives exchanged nervous glances. Rowan continued. "This afternoon Mercer Industrial signed with Northbridge Civil Partners." The room became impossibly still. The financing, manufacturing guarantees, logistic support, and performance bond have all been transferred. Someone near the back whispered, "The deal's gone." Rowan nodded politely. "It is." No celebration. No revenge. Just a business decision. Preston looked genuinely defeated. "You've cost us everything." Rowan answered quietly. "No. You did. You lost it before I arrived." Those words lingered longer than any speech could have. As guests slowly gathered their belongings, Rowan walked toward the exit. Once more. Then he stopped beside Eleanor. "Thank you." She looked surprised. "For what?" "You shared your bread basket." She laughed softly. "It was only bread." "It wasn't." He reached into his jacket pocket and handed her a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. "Mercer Industrial is donating $2 million to your engineering scholarship foundation in memory of my father." At the bottom, Rowan had written one sentence. "Because kindness deserves investment." 2. Eleanor folded the note carefully. "This will change hundreds of lives." "I hope so." Before leaving, Rowan walked over to Miranda one final time. "I meant what I said." She looked down. "I know. You made a mistake." "I did. What matters now is what you choose to become after tonight." She nodded quietly. Months later, after leaving Halcyon, Miranda accepted a leadership role at a nonprofit that trained young women for careers in engineering and construction management. She often told new managers that leadership wasn't measured by the people who impressed you, it was measured by the people you thought couldn't help you. She never mentioned Rowan's name. She didn't need to. The lesson stayed with her every day. Northbridge completed the project 2 years later. It finished ahead of schedule. More importantly, every employee at Rowan's oldest steel plant kept the jobs he had promised to protect.